Hello everyone, I'm Burpee1322 and welcome to the Stewards room, where we'll be taking a look at racing incidents submitted by you guys and trying to make a determination on who, if anyone, was at fault. There's a link in the description to submit your own clips, and feel free to check out the playlist link for more of these videos, specifically the first, which acts as a scene setter. Also, keep an eye out for cards popping up on screen towards the end of each segment, where you can vote on who you thought was at fault for each incident. So clip 1, F1 2018, and all of the clips from this week are all going to be about seemingly innocuous hits. So things that it doesn't look all that much on the surface of it, but it has, a big effect. So that was a small hit that we just saw from the Force India on the Sauber. The Sauber's coming out of the pit lane, so as a slower speed, but manages to, brake deeper into the corner and keep the position. And then basically the Force India just doesn't get out of it. And amazingly, the cars managed to stop. But yeah, that was 100% for me on the fault of the Force India, because the Force India should have just, it had no claim to that corner, and it shouldn't have been there. So back to the Rules of Racing document that we look at every single week, and we're going to skip straight to inside overtakes, disputes over the apex, and the same old thing that we've looked at before. If the attacker is more than halfway alongside the defender at the apex, then the attacker has the right to the racing line, and a collision is the fault of the defender. If the attacker is less than halfway alongside, then a collision is the fault of the attacker. And if the attacker is approximately halfway alongside, then both the attacker and the defender share equal blame. So we actually have to look at this in two ways, because there's actually two corners to consider. So obviously the first point here, we've got the Force India coming on the outside after the Sauber has come out of the pits, but it does brake earlier and the Sauber is managing to get up the inside. So for this first corner, we see that the Sauber has done enough to warrant the space on the inside. We can't actually see it from this perspective, but he is there. So the Sauber for the first corner was more than halfway alongside, so he was warranting the space on the inside. Now, this quickly turns in, that we had a right-hand corner, and it quickly turns into a left-hand corner. So the same rule, we kind of reset, and the same rule applies again. And as we'll see, we'll just play it on. It's only a very, very small hit, but the Force India should have backed out of this. We're coming to the apex of the corner right here, and it's actually the front wing of the Force India that hits the rear tire of the Sauber. So it's clearly that the attacker wasn't halfway alongside at the apex of the corner. Therefore, any collision is the fault of the attacker, and really the attacker should have just backed out of that one. The Force India should have backed out. That was entirely on the fault of the attacker, the Force India, for keeping his nose in when there was no way he was going to be able to do anything with that. So obviously, let me know your thoughts down below in the description, in the comments, and on the poll in the top right hand corner of the screen. It'll pop up in a card, and you can say vote on who you thought was at fault. But I mean, that even the Force India is completely off the track. You can see it there. It's not even making an attempt to make the corner at that point. It's just, should have backed out of that one, and a lot of people don't do that. So this second clip is kind of one of those things that, I think everybody gets annoyed with sometimes, where someone will just continue to take their racing line or have a little bit of a bump on somebody else and think that that's okay. But that isn't. What we've just seen there, that is definitely not okay. We're going to see it from another perspective as well. Obviously, we've got the grey car here, didn't get the best run out of the previous corner, gets a knock from the inside of that corner as well, and then the blue car basically just, drives him out of the way. And that's not acceptable. So regardless of what has happened previously, obviously we've got, if this is a long right-hander, really, if anything, it was about, it wasn't necessarily the cleanest move from the Mercedes here to, have a little bit of a hit on the grey car, but he was, it's one of those things where you'll get a little bit annoyed about it, but there's not going to be a penalty given for a small hit like that. And that was an innocuous hit. That didn't involve, that didn't cause a crash or anything. There's a very big difference between a bit of contact that involves a crash and a bit of contact that both people are allowed to continue. Now, the rules that we look at when it comes to the rules of racing are specifically, geared towards Formula One and open wheel racing. And people have mentioned in the comments previously that may not necessarily apply to closed cockpit racing and things like that. But it certainly does when the contact it ends up being, crash worthy. If it ends up with a crash and someone being taken out, the same rules apply. Something like that contact didn't really affect anyone. He managed to keep it in there. He wasn't spun around. The grey car wasn't spun around by it or anything like that. So it's one of those things that you expect with, closed wheel racing like this. But this certainly isn't. Now, obviously, we just see that the blue car basically just continues the speed that he's carrying around the corner. And that's something that you just can't do. Sometimes in racing, you have to accept that you've got to come off the accelerator pedal sometimes to avoid hitting someone. Yeah, you're going to lose a bit of speed, but that's what you got to do. That's part of racing. But he doesn't do that. He just continues his speed around the corner, essentially drives into the grey car at this point. That was a hefty contact. And I would say, to be honest, if that contact hadn't had a crash happen to it, you see this kind of stuff and more heavy contact and hits like this in sort of touring car racing and things like that in general. And as long as nobody is badly affected or crashed out, they normally let things like that slide. But obviously the grey car got turned around completely by that, and that is entirely the fault of the blue car for, making contact on the grey car, not halfway alongside. Obviously, as we saw, it was the front part of the blue car hitting the rear part of the grey car, so he wasn't even claiming to be halfway alongside or anything like that. It was basically just continuing to race as if there wasn't a car there, and then whatever happens he's not bothered about. So that is again another one of those small hits that has a big effect, and that would be for me a penalty on the blue car. But as always, you guys can let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and the poll will be in the top right hand corner of the screen as well, so you can vote. Was the blue car at fault, or was the grey car at fault, or was it just a racing incident? Was it just one of those things in your mind that happens and you wouldn't give a penalty to anyone for something like that? Let me know your thoughts. So our third clip, we're back on GTA, and again it's just going to be another small hit, but it's the effect that these bits of contact have is what determines whether penalties should be applied. As I've just said, you can have little bits of contact every now and then, but if something comes of it in terms of a crash, then some penalties have to be handed out. So for this one, again, I think it's pretty clear cut, but we'll go over it again and slow it down a little bit. Again, to have any claim to the inside of a corner, you do have to be more than halfway alongside the car who you're trying to overtake. If you're going up the inside, as we've just seen from the rules, we've got the Massacro here, the white Massacro, going for an overtake on the green Comet. And, tries it on this corner, doesn't quite work out, which is okay. They both continue. The Comet is able to keep the speed around the outside, which is, pretty well done. But they both live to fight another day. A little bit of contact there, but again, that's the perfect example that we've just seen there of a small innocuous hit that didn't amount to anything, and that's absolutely fine. You're not going to penalise anyone for that bit of contact. But then we come on a little bit further. The Comet gets a bit of a better run, but the Massacro tries to keep its nose in, essentially. Takes more speed around there, and obviously we're going to see the contact basically front wheel to rear wheel, not anywhere near halfway alongside. And again, if this contact had been exactly the same as what we've just seen in terms of what happens, if they'd just been a little bit of a touch and they'd both continued, we wouldn't even be looking at this. But because it basically sends the Comet into a spin, just a tiny hit like that is enough, and that's why you got to be careful sometimes when you're going at such high speeds. that tiny little hit like that is enough to send the Comet around towards the left, and then the White Massacre is still there again to get pivoted around with the second hit, which is the one that really does it, to be honest. You can't really put any fault for that on anyone other than the White Massacre for causing that collision. Now, you could say there's a little bit of, GTA crash enhancer physics, which is something in GTA that makes crashes worse. It will stick two cars together if they make contact a little bit more than what you would expect if it was just, there's actually a script programmed for that and you can turn it off. And that's what they do on the Project Homecoming server on 5M, and the racing is a lot better. You can actually have contact between two cars and not experience crashes like this. So probably something like this accounted for, that crash enhancer script accounted for the crash being as bad as it was. They both might have been able to continue if that wasn't the case. But the way that it is, it was the White Massacre that turned around the Green Comet, and you'd have to put the blame entirely on the White Massacre for that, because it was him who initiated the contact and he wasn't anywhere near enough alongside to be able to make it work. But as always, we do have the poll in the top right. It'll pop up in a card like it does at the end of every one of these clips, and you can vote on who you thought was at fault. Or was it just one of those things? Racing incident means that it's just one of those things. Either both were equally to blame or no one was to blame. Or was it the White Massacre or the Green Comet? You let me know in the poll in the top right. Final clip is again with GTA. We're in the Issy, which it's a horrible car to drive, the Issy, but we see that the Issy behind gets a good run coming into the corner, but never really commits to that overtake, I would say. So we're slowing it down, and you can see that the attacker in the dark green Issy does, he does have a little bit of an overlap on the light green Issy, but it's nowhere near enough, and really he wanted to have been braking much later than that to be able to get the move done, because the light green Issy is within his rights at this point of the corner to then start turning in to take the racing line. He has the racing line. The dark green Issy is nowhere near alongside to have any claim to that racing line from the rules that we just saw. He's not even halfway alongside at this point. He wants to be at least here to have some claim to, not be turned in on there. But he didn't. He didn't have enough of an overlap, and the contact that occurs is on the green Issy. You can't just, leave your nose in a little bit and pivot someone around like that. And again, that resulted in a loss of position. He got an overtake done by contact. And if you make an overtake because of the contact that's happened, then you should either give that position back or expect to face a penalty for that. You need to be, when we're talking about clean racing, it's all about making overtakes without contacting anyone, without having contact, without knocking anybody out of the way, and that's not what happens. So really the dark green Issy wanted to have been braking much later. So the light green Issy brakes, there, and the dark green Issy should have been waiting another couple of tenths of a second, but maybe braking, maybe about here. And by that point, he would have been alongside. The light green Issy wouldn't have been able to turn in because the dark green would have been there. But ultimately, at this point, because he didn't really fully commit to the overtake, the light green Issy is totally fine to, turn into the corner. And he gets pivoted around because he didn't fully commit to the overtake. And that is entirely the fault of the dark green Issy for that one. And that should be a case where the position is either given back or a penalty is applied if this is in a, competitive situation where penalties and points penalties or time penalties apply at the end of a racing event or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, the footage from this episode wasn't altogether too difficult to decide who was at fault. There will be a poll for this one, as always, in the top right. Was it the dark green Issy, the light green Issy, or was it just a racing incident in your mind? But for me, I wanted to cover these kind of things because they are just, small incidents, small hits every now and then, but they can have an effect. And it's about what those little bits of contact, what kind of effect they actually have on the other car who you've had contact with. And it's an important distinction. You can't just expect to have a little bit of contact and be able to then get away with it because, oh, it was just a small hit. It's about the effect that these incidents have. And if you're gaining a position from just, pivoting someone around and knocking them out of the way, even if they're able to continue and it was just a small loss of time, that's still you've taken an advantage from contact, and that's not what racing is about. So that's pretty much it for this episode. Let me know your thoughts down below and in the polls on the video itself. You can find in the video description all the info and links that you may need to submit your own clips. And if you'd like to support me, you can do so on Patreon by becoming a YouTube member or simply subscribing and liking the video. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.